We'll call ourselves to order and have a roll call, please.
Yeah, there you go.
Wear it. You need to call.
Carbone, I'm sorry, San City,
Here.
County of Monterey,
Yeah, here.
Eastside, Aranda,
Here.
Delray Oaks,
Here.
Salinas,
Here.
Pacific Grove, Castroville,
Here.
Monterey,
Here.
Marina Coast.
Here.
We do have a quorum.
Thank you very much. We move on to agenda item 3, which is our Pledge of Allegiance. And I don't know that we've asked Chaito to lead us in a long time. So if you wouldn't mind.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Ty. We get to agenda item 4, which is additions to the agenda. Are there any additions?
No additions.
No additions? No additions? All right, then we move on to approval of the agenda. I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you very much. We have a motion and a second. Anyone from the public wishing to comment on the motion to approve the agenda under agenda item 5? Seeing no hands, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Any abstentions? Please show unanimous approval. Get to agenda item 6, which is public comments. Anyone wishing to address the board on matters that do not appear on today's agenda may do so now for not more than 3 minutes. Comments on any other matter listed on the agenda are welcome at the time the matter is being considered by the board. And if you're out there in virtual Zoom land, raise your Zoom hand. Well, I don't see anyone, so we'll move on to action items, which is the first of which is 7A, to receive an update on the low-income sewer assistance program. Mr. Sciutto.
Thank you, Chair Moore. So, unfortunately, Rachel is not here, so you have to listen to Mike and myself.
Sorry, was that too?
Seriously? Can we mute? But anyway. So, as you well know, we have sort of tried to enhance the customer assistance program, certainly in conjunction with moving to the tax rolls to try to alleviate any concerns that the board has had for individuals.
They don't have him in the diet.
Oh, no.
It's a,
Hey, Tammy? Okay. So currently the budget is $200,000. That is non-rate revenue in there. We've had a lot of interest in it, which is very good and what we wanted. However, and I'll pass it off in a little bit to the ad hoc committee for some discussions. We may want to make some slight modifications to how we're processing and moving forward with the program. So as of the 22nd of May, we had received already 943 applications. Of those applications, we've processed 561. So staff is trying to crank through them, but obviously it takes a fair amount of work. Of those 561, 450 have been approved. The reason I want to sort of highlight that number is it's about an 80% approval rating. So it's pretty high. So when you look at the fact that we have 943 that we've received already, it is likely that we're going to hit about $150,000, a little over that $153,000 based on the same approval rating. So I know the ad hoc committee certainly wanted to make sure we had money available for renters, and it's what we sold this program on when we were doing all of our outreach to the member entities as well as through the community. So there's a recommendation in here from the ad hoc committee that we wanted the board to consider and discuss. One is to add some funds to the customer assistance program, another $100,000, and then stop the applications going to homeowners. I know there's some thought maybe, hey, can we do it tomorrow? I was more of the opinion, should we do it June 1st to provide a little lead time that the door's not slamming on people, we can do some advertising on our website, social media and things like that, just so it's not abrupt. And then at that point, the additional funds would be allocated towards renters. Now, the rental program is still being developed. We need some legal review. We're looking at other programs that do this throughout the state just to make sure we are compliant with everything. It is likely that the rental program won't start until August or September of this year. So the two changes that we're thinking about is, can we add some more money? And two, can we shut down the homeowner one as of June 1st? Mike, did you want to provide any more information or context on the program or the ad hoc committee meeting before we?
Yeah, that was a really robust conversation at the ad hoc committee, and we met on May the 15th. And we provided the committee with some numbers at that point in time of the applications received and things like that. And since May 15th, we've already had 110 more applications since that time frame. We've processed almost another 210, which kind of raised up the projected allocation. So like Paul said, it's very popular and one we're trying to work through very quickly. This has some other ramifications for the annual rate report and things of that nature.
And actually, I know we're asking for a change because it's too popular, but I think this is a great problem to have. I know when we initially started the program, we didn't have many people coming to it. So the fact that it is this successful to me is a huge positive. Now it's just a matter of how we operate moving forward to make the most impact for the community. I don't know if the ad hoc, there's three of you that were on the ad hoc
Three
committee
of
that
us,
are here.
that's correct.
If you have any comments or thoughts based on the staff report and the,
So just want to make sure everyone's clear. And by the way, thanks to the members who are here and the ones who aren't, who are on the ad hoc committee. We did, I can confirm, have a pretty extensive, pretty robust discussion of the issue. Just want to make sure everyone understands that the property owner's version of this, in other words, this assistance for those who actually own an APN, has a hard deadline because we have to get the amount of their benefit from this program to the county so that it will appear in their county tax records. So correct me if I'm wrong, if we have this program going forward in future years, we'll have to establish an opening date for applications and a closing date. And that closing date will have to be a hard date for property owners in order to get that information into the billing system, which is the county tax assessors, in a timely manner going forward. Am I correct in assuming that any program we do for renters is entirely different in that regard? It could start or stop however we choose to do. Is that correct?
yes, that is correct. So for homeowners, you're absolutely right. We need to make sure that data is, that goes to the county. For renters, what we're considering and some of the other programs that we've looked at, there'll be checks cut to them. So there is some more flexibility being that we're not tied to the hard date of the county's requirements.
Or at some point, we might get into the modern world and Venmo it or PayPal it or direct deposit or.
And that's one thing I was going to say, probably with the renters program, we're going to hope to actually do it probably by ACH because it's just much more efficient via ACH. The nice thing, this has served as a good starting platform for our program because thanks to outreach, we worked with Civic Clerk to set up a secure website for submitting the information for this program. And we'll use that secure website for this once we get work with BB&K to set up the parameters of the program. But that's one of the things we'll solicit from all the applicants. Those that are successful, we'll ask them for basically their checking and ACH numbers. So we don't issue them checks. We just do it's much more efficient that way.
Well, we do have to assume that there will be some subset of eligible folks who do not have a checking account, don't know how those things work, have never gone to a bank, do stuff all cash, and if they get a check, they go to one of these, I don't know, fly-by-night check cashing entities.
And we can definitely work with it. It's kind of like what we've done with
right.
the owner program. We encourage people obviously to go to the website to do their application, but we allowed them to also submit it by mail. So a similar kind of process.
So Vice Chair Williamson or Director Rocha? Director Rocha, go ahead,
Yeah.
please.
Thank you for your presentation, for your work on this. To speak to the urgency of the issue, what we're coming up against is that $200,000 is allocated. We've met at this point, probably encumbered around 130,000, and we'll be closer to that 150 number probably any day now, without the window opening yet for renters. So those of us in the committee shared the opinion that what we would like to do is to put a stop at this point for the owners, open it up to the renters, and also add additional funds to the program so that the amount that's allocated for the owners is an equitable proportion to the amount that's allocated to renters as well, or an equal proportion, I should say. And so we would like to see 50,000 to 100,000 allocated additionally. That way renters get that 150 that was offered to the owners at 150 as well. And for that to be something that we're keeping in mind moving forward in subsequent years as we create the guidelines for this program and the budget for this program. I don't know if I missed anything.
Yeah, no,
Chair Williamson, go ahead.
I think it was a good recap. I have two quick questions that were helpful as part of our discussion. The first is if maybe staff could explain why are we having to separate out doing a program for homeowners versus renters? Why are we even having this conversation?
You mean, yeah,
Mike or Fred?
yeah. So the reason why is because basically there's two different ways of providing the credit. For the owners, because we're going on the tax roll, basically starting for 24-25, what we're going to be doing is, I'm going to make up this number, but it's approximately $600 is the amount we're going to put on the roll for M1W for next year. So what we'll be doing, we'll bringing this back to the board next month for final approval. But in essence, their amount will be lowered by 4 months worth. So instead of it being 600, it's going to be about 400 that's going to go on their roll. The renters, because obviously they don't have a parcel number, in their service area, it's a different process. Basically, and since we'll no longer have their individual M1W accounts, what we have to do is we actually have to issue them a check or ACH payment. So, but that can be done anytime during the year. For the owners, we have to submit the information to the county no later than August 1st. That's why there has to be the hard deadline for the owners versus there's a lot more flexibility for the renters. Mike, I don't know if you want to add on anything. Yeah.
I believe we'll have to get a W-9 from the renter in order to give them a check.
And part of it too, we're going to be coordinating. This is part of our work when we sit down with BB&K, is really coordinating closely with the owners to make sure, that it's acceptable for them to basically for the renters to get the credit as well too. So that's something, it's a whole different set of logistics we have to work out on that.
And then is the assumption that, does staff anticipate us spending the full $300,000?
I'm going to say yes. And the reason, based on the 943 applications already received, that's 150,000 at the same approval rating. And then we haven't even tapped into the rental market, which is fairly significant in our service area.
Well, and one thing that I remember too from our discussion from the ad hoc committee was those that didn't have an approved application did get a response and have an opportunity to provide more additional information. So
Yes.
just because we're seeing the percentage at 80% right now doesn't mean that won't increase as folks might provide the requirements needed in order to qualify. So it'd be interesting to see how that changes. But I mean, I echo what my colleague, board member Rocha shared. I mean, to me, there's a big part of an equity lens that we're looking at this through. And I think a big part of what got us to one of the big arguments that was used in our transition to the tax rules was the idea of selling this, expanding the program specifically for renters. So for those reasons, in addition, in the service area, the majority of the residents that live in the service area are renters. So, it was really important for us to make sure that we created that opportunity to not provide, whatever little was left over. It was, really a feeling of a slap in the face, and truly homeowners have a greater chance of trying to figure things out than a renter does in a financially strapped situation. And so we just want to make sure that we're providing
an equity lens to this and ensuring that they have an opportunity to participate. And then the last thing I would share is I know that there was some conversation around the sustainability of the program, but knowing what the funding would be available for the program in the future. And it seems like for the short term, we're good. I think we'll have to figure this out as we go along. And I imagine there's going to be growing pains in many different ways of us transitioning to the tax rolls. So I think that this is a prudent decision for us to figure out how it works. And if there is a reduction in the budget that's available in the future, I think it provides us an opportunity to engage with various stakeholders, whether they be nonprofit organizations or our jurisdictions, to help partner with this agency to make sure that we're taking care of the most vulnerable folks within our service area.
All right, couple, so whenever we talk about this, I think it's probably a good idea just to put on the record and remind the public that what the source of funding is for this and how that relates to what we collect from our customers, broadly speaking.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I want to kind of reemphasize the point. We cannot use fee revenues collected from our customers to basically pay for a customer assistance program. We can only use what's called non-fee revenues. And in our case, basically, and we've worked with BB&K to kind of get an opinion on this as well too. The only source of revenues that we can really dedicate are penalties, basically delinquencies. So, and with us going to the tax roll, we anticipate our delinquencies going down significantly. So that's actually why we kind of capped it at about $200,000 for kind of the foreseeable future. One of the things we'll do is after the first year of working with the county, we'll get a better idea as to kind of what our true delinquencies are and kind of adjust it at that point. But we wanted to be very conservative for the board as to how much we allocated to the program, and particularly for the first year. Now, the good part is, in particular, the last couple of years, our penalties have been significantly in excess of what we budgeted. So we have built up some non-fee reserves that we can do a one-time pull from. But for our budget policy, we really don't want to use one-time monies for ongoing programs. So it's just a balance for the board to consider, as we go forward.
So one other question, I can imagine somewhere along the line, the possibility of a property owner applying for the program, being approved, and getting a reduction in the service fee that will show up on their future property tax. But that property owner doesn't actually live on that property and has it rented out to a low income tenant who now applies to our rental program. I don't think we want to be doing a double payment in that regard. So how will you protect, from a management perspective or a data perspective, how do you intend to protect against that occurrence?
I can. Sorry, Mike can add on as well too. That what we're doing in particular with our current program, the owner program, we are tracking actually by parcel number. In essence, the payments, that we're going to be making the deductions to. So one of the things, and again, we'll be working with BB&K on this to make sure, it kind of meets all the requirements. But that's one of the cross checks that I see is that's one of the first things we would see is, okay, did we already do it for that address and parcel number? And if we have, obviously we're not like you had mentioned, we're not going to give two credits for the same address.
Well, just be careful. You can't really expect a person in a rental situation to know what the assessor's parcel number is of the property he's living on, or even know how to find it. And property addresses in the tax assessor's office versus APNs, sometimes there's two addresses in there. There's the address of the property and there's the address that the property tax bills go to, which could be easily confused and confound this whole process.
And one of the things, and we've had already good experience with this, is the submittals for the owners. A lot of them didn't know their parcel numbers. So that's one of the things we've done as staff is there's a program called Parcel Quest out there. The county uses the program as well too. But that's a way also with our current system that we can kind of look up properties in multiple ways. But you bring up an excellent point. We want to make sure we have got a good double check system in place for when we're able to roll out the renters program. It's a good point.
Okay. Director Garcia Arzola, you were also on the committee, and obviously, we're talking about the low income program. Do you have anything to add from that meeting?
Well, I walked in midway, but I'm pretty sure both my colleagues had covered this. Operating fund. No, I have nothing else to add.
All right. Thank you very much. Any other directors? Any other directors have questions or comments? Director Habino, then Director Ragsdale Cronin.
Just out of curiosity, in terms of, it sounds like this takes a lot of staff bandwidth, going through all the applications and whatnot. And then it sounds like, you know, with Tom's question, there could be a lot of vetting as well, and which would be more staff time. So how is that accounted for? I mean, is in terms of, how we compensate the staff for doing such a thing? Are you able to take some of the money that's within the program to pay staff, you know, at that extra time that you're spending going through and vetting all these applications, or is it just part of doing business?
We've
So-
kind of, oh, go ahead, Paul. Yeah.
I was gonna say, so right now it is doing business. However, I don't know, Fred, have we set up we have not set up a specific time card code for this, have we?
No, we have not. No.
But in the future, we could to track the hours incurred for the assessment of these. But we haven't thus far. It's just part of the regular hours of our employees.
What we've kind of done is time that we would have normally spent on like site, you know, field inspections and stuff that we basically have rededicated for this. But we knew that we were going to have to kind of pull, especially, you know, this year and next year, just with the transition. That's kind of our big thing right now, which we're kind of really minimizing the site inspections and focusing on just assisting our customers with, you know, calls and questions they have on the program, on the customer assistance program and transition. So we have been logging the time. We have a phone log where we've been logging the time, in particular on customer phone calls related to the issues.
Okay, thank you.
Well, and in addition, if I recall correctly, when the board chose 200,000 for this program, we did so knowing that there was a substantially larger current amount in the fines and fees account, if you will. So there's, even though we're not accounting your time for it, is there enough excess money to be essentially paying for that time?
Yes, there
Okay.
is. And so certainly moving forward, if the board would like, we can establish a job code for this. And the customer service staff who's primarily been doing it thus far can start coding their time and we can track it.
Right. Director Ragsdale Cronin.
Yeah, just you stole my thunder on the double dip.
Oh.
So good deal. My question is if a family owns more than one home and were to apply, I would apply, and then my wife would apply for a different property. Are we making sure we're limiting it to one stipend per household, family?
Right now, what we're doing, we're kind of looking at, so there's 3 different ways they can qualify for the program. So they can qualify under the PG&E Cares and FARA program, and those 2 are directly address tied. So we have to see that direct tying basically. The other way is basically through their 1040. And so on their 1040 would also show kind of their main address. So that's
Okay.
really the key thing on all 3 of them. We've got to make sure that that main address is tying to their application. So
Sounds like you
But-
got it all sewed up.
But to your point, Bill, if you and your wife did your taxes at, you know, and just had them mailed
We
to
filed
different.
separately and all that. If we
Yeah.
did everything separate. Yeah.
No,
But-
so we're not going to catch everyone.
No,
And that's
obviously not.
just the nature of the beast, but
It sounds like it's pretty, the application process is pretty airtight. So I'm.
yeah,
good.
and our
Thank-
people are, you know, the customer service staff, Tiffany has been going through all these applications and is tracking all the data. So we'll have that moving forward as well.
Director Church, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I got a few questions. The law not allowing us to use revenues, that's a state law, I assume? Okay. Okay,
State constitution, yeah.
pretty good. Get my constitutional law in today. And what is the income level? What's the requirements again for this? We haven't really talked about that. I want to refresh my memory.
So we raised it to basically, it's about 60% of the median, right? If I remember right. So it's about, if I remember, it wasn't it about 80 or 90? I mean, it depends on the number of members in your family. So obviously the more members you have in your family, the greater it goes up. That's actually one of the points I just wanted to address for Council Member Williamson. A big reason for the increased number of applicants is because the board approved us to kind of take on those 2 additional levels for approval, basically the FARA program and the 1040 program is verification. So they were they're much higher limits than our previous program, but I think it was about.
Do you have that, Mike?
Yeah, I had it in the other handout, but it's like if it was a single person under the wage guidelines, it's like 54,000, and then the next one's like 63. So it really jumps up.
In a family of 4?
Well, I can go find that.
Okay, I
We
mean,
have
just
it.
roughly.
It actually, I think it's about 80,000. And actually that table goes from a single to a family of 8, if I'm not mistaken. And there's different wage requirements throughout.
Okay, and right now, and this is fiscal year July through end of June, right?
The program is, yes.
Okay, I just want to make absolutely sure we're on to that. So family of 2, let's just call it that, about 60 or so thousand. And we've had all these applicants for homeowners in there already. Obviously, I think if we get into renters, it's going to be even more because the people who are homeowners that are getting assistance are going to be, most homeowners don't qualify to buy a home at $60,000. And if they do, I want to know their trick. But I mean, a lot of people want to know their trick. And so I'm assuming what we're talking about here, because we really don't have a breakdown of who the homeowners are. We're probably talking about people that have inherited a home in some way and don't have a lot of income, or senior folks that are a very limited income, which I think are probably going to be a majority, or somebody who's had some disability or some accident somewhere along the way. So it's a very small, even though we've got quite a few people here, it's got to be a pretty small number onto there. And our cutoff is if you hit that 63,000, let's say that is, and you're at 62, you get this full. And if you're at 64, you get nothing, right?
Correct.
Okay. How many dollars altogether are can somebody get in dollar amounts for this program?
So it's 4 months of billing, which is
It's about 203.40, I think.
203.40. Okay. Yeah, I wonder, I wonder if, and how we do this, because once you open up to renters, we're going to get a lot of renters onto here. So we're going to have a lot of people, and I don't, I disagree a little bit that the homeowners might be more knowledgeable. I mean, they might be, but I think we're dealing with sometimes elderly people. I think we're dealing with people again who have been, could have had various forms of disability, or somebody who inherited. It isn't like people we're looking at here went out and have a business that made a fortune and bought a home and now are, trying to get financial aid.
I would just clarify, I didn't say they were more knowledgeable. My point was they could get a reverse mortgage. They have more opportunity, I think,
gotcha.
than a renter would.
Right, that's true. You did not say knowledgeable. I couldn't remember your word exactly, and but I guess what I'm looking at is I'm trying to look at, I'm not trying to really break down that you own a home for what, and getting it under some unusual circumstances have created this situation for you, or if you're a renter. I'm just looking at people in need here, whatever it is. And I'm a little hesitant to really try to do anything to split them apart. And if we do go through and we put up a program and we get 3/4 renters or 3/4 homeowners, what I'm looking at there is that's not so important. It's that people that need it are getting help. And I'm afraid, and I've been a big advocate of this whole thing all along, but I'm afraid with the demand could very much outstrip what we're able to do. And then I just hate to cut the thing off. I'm wondering if we have to maybe reach down and go a little bit, tighten it a little bit, and go a little lower and make sure we're helping those people that aren't really at 50,000 as an individual making it, but somebody at 25,000 that are making it. I'm also wondering too, as we get down to is if we have the same problem with a lot of renters in situations and homeowners, well, I would say renters, is one thing we noticed out in Pajaro as we went through and we're distributing aid, you had multiple households in a home. So if you have 4 renters, 4 households in one home, who is getting it? How are we determining?
It would just be for the one house, correct?
Oh, no, but I'm talking about
renter?
4, you can have
He's saying
multiple
4
households
Yeah.
in one home.
Let's say you have 4 families in one home.
Yeah,
He's saying who gets it? The
yeah,
first person that comes in with that address, I assume.
I would think so. Yeah. And we're gonna have to work with this is gonna be a little more complicated because we're gonna work with the property owner that's providing the property for the rent. So there's gonna be an arrangement or a sign off potentially from the property owner saying, yes, we're gonna allow this tenant to apply for the program. There will be a little bit of a check and balance there.
And this is really where we have to work with BB&K on this, because they've already kind of talked to us a little bit saying there's a lot of legal issues that we got to make sure that we address. So we want to kind of proceed, with caution as we go forward. That's why we were able to kind of roll out the owner program first, because that's relatively straightforward. It's, parcel number, they get the credit. The renters it's a little bit different issue.
I guess where I'm just at, just to my final comments on it is, I want to see a sustainable program. And I'm not sure if we're going to bring in renters, if this is going to be sustainable, because with the qualifications we're asking for right now.
And Supervisor Church, it's a great point. This first year is sort of an unknown as it's structured right now. We've already gone out with a program with those limitations for the homeowners, and now we're going to go to renters. In subsequent years, I'm assuming we can tailor it a little bit or modify slightly. If we kept it open for just the homeowners right now, the renter program is not going to be ready till September 1st. So there's a high likelihood that the funds we've allocated thus far may be gone. So hence the reason one of the decision points in the recommendation is, can we add more money? Do we put a stop date for phase 1? And should there be some sort of allocation split between phase 1 and phase 2? With the understanding, you're absolutely right. It may be oversubscribed. It may be oversubscribed with either category, but I think this first year will certainly inform us to a greater degree.
So before we get to Director Rocha in a moment, I have some follow-up that relates to Director Church's comments. So which of the 3 qualification programs is the lowest income, the tightest, the hardest to achieve? Is that the PG&E?
That's the CARES program. So the CARES, go ahead.
Is PG&E?
PG&E CARES.
So what, this is just a suggestion. You could, for instance, open the program September 1st only to CARES and hold it open for, say, 2 months and see what response you get under CARES, and let the public know that December 1st, we're going to open it to that second level. And then we'll go to the 1040s starting in January, and the program all closes in May or whatever. So we could phase it in, and we would be getting information that would help answer Director Church's question. And then a related issue is, what are we going to do with a renter who arrives mid-year and is only in that property for half of our fiscal year or 3 months of our fiscal year, or puts in an application the week before the applications close and he's just started renting? We're going to give him a full year's benefit? In other words, how are we going to figure out, how are we going to sort that out?
So a couple points here. That's to the point I think Mike mentioned is the verification from the
landlord,
homeowner.
right?
So I'm renting from you. You need to provide some verification of when I was in or when the contract was, and then I do the same thing. If we figure out we want to bend the numbers, I guess, as renter and owner, we could, and it's hard to verify that.
So we'd look to staff for a recommendation as to whether you only qualify as a renter if you're in there for a full year, or if those who are in for part of a year get a partial, which obviously would entail more staff work and calculations. We'll look for a recommendation from you in that regard.
In terms of that rental program, like I said, the homeowner one, that's launched and we're getting things. The development of the rental program along with legal is going to happen for the most part, June, July timeframe as we start ironing this out. So in terms of staggering things, once again, we can tailor it next year or in future years. This year's a little bit different, just trying to get it
Moving.
launched.
Right.
And
Correct.
please understand, developing in June, July, it's going to go live September 1-ish.
In some form.
Yeah.
Okay, Director Rocha.
Thank you for your clarification comments. Really, the reason we're here is because by the time this opens up to renters, at the pace we're going, there will be no funds left for renters. And so we're trying to put forward something that will allow us to be able to have the option available for renters. And that's where we're having the discussion about allocating an additional amount and setting that aside for renters, just so that there's a pot of funding available. And we don't open up something to renters that we have no way of being able to provide that service anymore. So that's really where this recommendation is coming from. I agree with the sentiments shared by Director Church that when it comes to wanting to have as big of an impact as we can possibly have with this program. And I think that that can be accomplished by setting up a differential amount between property owners and renters to ensure that a wider array of people are served. That won't happen if we just leave it up to chance. And so I think that identifying a set amount for renters and for property owners will allow us to have as big of an impact as possible. And adding to this budget right now will ensure we have money once the program is available to renters. So just wanted to clarify that.
Vice Chair Williamson.
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts. I wanted to follow up on one point that you made, Chair. I don't know if we need to necessarily create a requirement for the tenant to live in the unit for a full year. I mean, it gets something interesting to explore, but I imagine that as long as they live there for the minimum amount of months that we're giving them funding for, to me, I think that would be a qualifier to do it. And I say that to the extent of that might really help somebody that's in a pinch that is trying to just get stable and onto their feet. So I just kind of offer that as a different thought process there. And then in the future, as we look at the program, I'm wondering if we can look at the possibility of avoiding this contention of trying to differentiate between homeowners and renters. I know that we have to do that this year because of we're running and we have to get the homeowners in place now and while we're still kind of building the model for the renters. But if we can avoid that, because it almost kind of feels like we're trying to pit two different groups against each other, and that's not the purpose. I think it's just trying to get up and running. So if there's an opportunity for us to address it in the future, I think that would really help quell some of the concerns there. Yeah, I think you pointed this comment out and so did Paul, but the funding is going to run out. So I think it's that point about wanting to make sure there's enough there for everybody. Even if we left it with homeowners, it seems very likely it's going to run out. So I think that it doesn't really help an argument there. And then the last thing I would share is that we changed the parameters, and staff spoke to about lowering the threshold of who's eligible to qualify, or expanding the eligible of who's qualified, but we also added the amount of months of payment that are included too. I think before it was two, and now it's 4. So there's a lot of things that went into making the funding run away from us here a lot faster, which is a good problem to have. I mean, we're kind of trying to figure out what that right space is for us here. So I appreciate staff's effort in kind of working with the board on this and really trying to make sure that we're creating this protection for those that are most vulnerable. All right, that's it. Thank you.
Other directors? Staff?
I just
Director
follow
Church.
up. on here. So I'm all for, if, you know, putting aside, let's go for renters here for the remainder and balance it off we can. But I think that the program's already showing that it's a little bit off the rails by using this up so fast. I think we need to look at making it stricter. Not really having a separate renter and homeowner. Just have a one pot, but have it to be something, go back to where it was a little stricter, so that the most needy get what they need. I think we've expanded it too much, and it needs to be restricted and have it available for anybody who needs it. I think it's going to be more renters than homeowners when it eventually comes down to it, and that's fine. It just needs to go to those who need it.
Any other directors?
I have to agree with my colleagues here. I think it's imperative to get this up and running as soon as possible. But we also have to realize that this is the first year as well that we're starting to develop it. So there is room to grow. There is room to make modifications as we go. But definitely we need to get this going, increase the funding. I think we need to protect renters at the forefront, and really just make sure that we're not forgetting that this is going to people that need it the most. So I just wanted to echo the sentiments.
Director Carbone?
Yes, and I'd just like to follow up with Director Church earlier's comments on seniors with set incomes, or people who may have inherited a home, and so they inherit a home from maybe a parent who's passed, and they maybe have 4 or 5 kids or adults, grown adults who's living and they're working, you know, who may be seniors themselves, or working, you know, in a family, to trying to make the utility payments and the property payment of a home. Just, so I've seen it, so.
Thank you, Director Carbone. Any other staff? Do you think you have solid direction from us?
What, I'll let Mr. Gilpin talk, I guess.
No, I just wanted to remind you, I think you may have some public comment.
We'll, yeah.
In terms of the direction, you know, on the recommendation, there was 3 things. One was increasing, one was a split between phase 1, phase 2, and then stopping phase 1 at a specific time, which we were thinking June 1st or, you know, end of May. So that if that could be part of a motion, that would be most helpful.
Would it be helpful to say that the cutoff date is June 1st, and then that we add an additional $100,000 to the program and set that aside for renters? I would put that in the form of a motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. We'll go out to the public, see what comments they might have on the motion or on the item. And if you are coming in virtually, please use your Zoom hand. I don't see any phone numbers calling in, so. All right, seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board. All in favor, say aye.
Just point of clarity. Sorry, I missed the motion.
Yeah.
Can I get that
Yeah, of
clarification
course.
on that?
The motion was to put a cutoff date of June 1st for the property owners and to add an additional $100,000 to the program and have that money be set aside for renters.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and did it include bringing back eventually a proposal more specific for the renters?
Yes, I'll include that as well.
Okay.
Sorry, can I ask a clarifying question to staff? Did the board already approve the initial $200,000?
Yes.
Okay, because that was something that we were debating, and I just wanted to clarify for the
Yes,
motion.
I thought we did a couple.
So, well, what it is, just to remind the board, this $200,000 is part of the 24-25 budget, basically, because in essence, this is what's going to be placed on the tax roll for 24-25. So just to clarify a little bit on that. So, and you'll see this as part of tonight's presentation on the budget.
With an additional 100,000 in it, bringing it to 300.
From this action, we'll add another 100,000 for it. Yeah.
And the clarification on your addition to the motion, we were discussing about guidelines for the renters, and that was pertaining to what exactly?
Renters, it's just a direction to staff to bring us back a more specific proposal
That's
for
what I
renters,
understood.
starting in September.
Mhm.
Okay, your second stand?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Any other discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? Please show unanimous approval. Thank you very much. We move on to agenda item 7B, budget. Mr. Shoot up.
Oh, yeah.
You were supposed to say the budget.
Isn't that what I said? Check the enthusiasm in my voice.
We gotta separate these two.
Yes, we're going back to the COVID barriers.
Yeah, something.
That'll help.
I'll just get louder, okay?
Possible?
God.
Thank you, Chair Moore. So yeah, we're excited to have the presentation on the 24-25 budget before us tonight. We've talked about it in the past, and there's a number of significant expenses moving on. As you well know, we're in the middle of an existing Prop 218 that takes us through June 30th, 2026. So what this budget does reflect is what that standing Prop 218 was already authorized. What you'll hear, Fred will go over the overall budget and debt and revenues and everything. We'll also have a presentation on the capital improvement projects, which are a primary driver for our budget, as you well know, and Matt Thompson will be doing that. I believe Frank Rich will be talking a little bit about our IS and IT capital improvement. Something I would love the board to focus on is you'll see a couple scenarios in upcoming debt financing. As we've discussed, with the sheer volume of capital projects, we will need to do some financing. There are a few things. I think Matt and Fred did a great job working on that plan, extending it a little bit so to try to attenuate some of the financial impacts of that debt. But there are a couple options of when we issue that. Of course, as we discussed at Budget Personnel, we are looking at a variety of sources. What you'll see here is primarily looking at it from a debt issuance in the private markets. We're also looking at WIFIA through EPA as well as SRF. They do have better rates. They're much more onerous, as you probably are aware, but we'll keep working on that. The main thing is the overall budget and when that debt hits. With that as a backdrop, I was going to turn it over to Fred unless there was any questions.
Right. Thanks, Paul. Yeah. So tonight, yeah, we're going to present for you the 24-25 budget. One of the things, and when you'll see the final budget document in September, you'll see one of the new things we did for this year is we actually kind of did a 2-year budget format. So the final budget document, you'll kind of see that we did estimates both for 24-25 and 25-26. And you'll see as part of tonight's presentation too, we kind of focus a little bit more on the long-term forecast because of what Paul talked about earlier, the need for, future bond financing. So tonight's presentation will basically talk a little bit about the recently adopted new strategic goals and how those were incorporated into the budget, kind of focus a little bit on the highlights of the budget, our projections for both revenues and expenses, what we're currently seeing in the economy and how that potentially affects us. There's a few position, either additions or reclassifications that we're looking at for next year. Matt, like we talked about earlier, we'll talk a little bit more about our capital budget proposed, and we'll talk a little bit about the long-term forecast scenarios that Paul talked about it as well. So again, what we've done with the budget document is incorporated the new strategic plan. So the 5 key elements of that plan involve technology, and you'll see Frank will talk a lot about that with the IT plan that's in there, focusing on making sure we maintain a competitive advantage, implementing strategies for remaining net neutral for water and energy, continuing to be the employer of choice in the area, and engaging in educating our community on developing and continuing to maintain our cooperative partnerships. So this just kind of gives you an overview of the service level that we provide here for our area. So we currently maintain 42 pump stations. We maintain about 35 miles of pipeline. We have over 288,000 customers in the area, and we treat about 18, and this was last fiscal year, we treat about 18 million gallons per day of wastewater. And we're really proud of our ability, how we're able to recycle most of that wastewater. As you can see over time, we've been able to recycle. In fact, in last year alone, between pure water and our reclamation, we recycled over 13,000 acre feet of recycled water, both for agriculture and for reuse as portable water in the area, which we're really proud of. And we continues to be a main focus of the agency itself. So as far as the budget itself, our proposed revenues are about $69 million for next year. So this includes the taking of our rates. Our current rate is $44 a month for residential. That's going up to $50.95 next year. So it's about a 16% increase. Our operating expenses include, increases, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but some personnel increases, a lot relating to maintenance, power, and utilities. We do have a pretty aggressive capital program for next year that we're incorporating, but we're really proud we're still able to maintain what I think are pretty good reserve levels. Our operating reserves now are at 50% of our annual budget, and our capital reserves are at about 11%, and our coverage remains strong. We're projecting it to be about 300% for next year. And just to put it in perspective, our recommended minimum is about 200%, so we're well over that. One thing I also wanted to mention on that as well too, it incorporates, per the board policy, a 5% operating contingency and a 10% capital contingency for the current year. So our budget does include for a couple other of our funds as well too, for our 3 reclamation programs, CSIP, SVRP, and SRDF. They've had some funding limitations, so we've had to kind of work with them to cut back funding for those programs for next year. A renewable energy program, we continue to work with Regen on those projects. And pure water, basically a lot of that increase relates to both utilities and chemicals. So the proposed rates for next year for CalAm and the water management districts is about 4,200 acre feet. That's based upon a production level about 3,700 acre feet for them. And then for Marina Coast has a bit of a difference this year because per their contract, they were estimating initially they thought they'd be taking about 600 acre feet from us. The amount that they were taking from us actually has been substantially less. It's only been about 400. So their rate is kind of going up a bit as a result of that reduced production for them. The next slide basically shows you for all of our different member entities what the combined rates will be for next year. These are the monthly rates. As you know, we're going to the property tax roll, so they'll see an annual charge of basically, in essence, 12 times these amounts on the property tax roll. So what we'll be doing is on the property tax roll, they'll see 2 lines, one for our portion of the charge, and if the member agency has their add-on portion, they'll see a separate line for that on their charge as well too. And we were talking about this earlier. The customer assistance credit for those that qualify will get about $200 of credit against their property tax bill in the next fiscal year. So I'm going to turn this over to Mike for the next couple of slides. He's going to talk about some of the current grants we have in place and a couple of current plans for.
All right. Thanks, Fred. So we've been really active in this space, trying to support the agency. And as we, excuse me, expand our renewable energy portfolio and the pure water expansion. So you can see here with CalRecycle, that was the Energia digester upgrade that we received at 4.2 million in November. We received the state revolving fund of 15 million that will go to the end of the expansion that'll get applied at the end when that occurs in October 2025, as well as the Bureau money for expansion. We got a community project from Mr. Panetta to look at our electrical relocation. When that gets completed, that'll get applied, and you can see that the grants that we for cybersecurity from the USEP, another community project that was funded, that'll take place in 2026. The opportunities that we've applied for recently was a renewable energy program with the EPA for almost 50 million. We requested some funds for backup generation of wastewater treatment, and we just found out last week that that was denied, but we definitely applied. And then the Coral Street pump station, we applied for some resiliency, 3.1 million. We submitted that. We should know soon about that. And then as part of the California Energy Commission, it's called the SERI program. And we just started our kickoff meetings with those, and that application will be due in middle of June. So really active in this space, trying to help reduce the cost from our customers if we can get these extra funds for some of those really awesome opportunities of trying to get that net neutral, not only for water production, but also how much energy that we use.
Thanks, Mike. So just highlight of our expenses. I've talked about this kind of already a little bit, but really the main drivers of our increases for next year. We've had, obviously the MOU agreements are coming up at the end of this year. So we've had to assume some cost of living adjustments for our budget for next year. We do continue to face increasing costs for healthcare and CalPERS. There are some proposed changes, personnel changes that we'll talk about in a little bit. And really on the other operating costs, the biggest three areas are chemicals and utilities continue to rapidly rise. And we're trying to focus on additional amount of maintenance that's needed as our plan ages as well too. And we'll talk a little bit later about the capital program and debt service as well. So we're not looking at a lot of proposed staffing changes for next year, but there are a few, kind of in three different areas. In IT, we're looking at a couple different changes. One, we currently have one part-time IS technician that kind of splits their time a little bit between admin and the plant. We're looking to kind of add a second part-time so we can basically have full coverage spread out between the two locations. We really get a lot of bang for our buck from the part-time position. In fact, two of our current full-time employees started out as part-time employees in IT for us. So it's worked out to be a really great program. The other thing for IT is we're looking to basically reclassify one of our positions. We had it as a record specialist. We're looking to reclassify it as a business system architect to really give IT a lot more flexibility, in their administration of a lot of different programs, including ERP, CMMS, and several other different programs as well. For engineering department, they're looking to add a couple of different positions. One, they're looking to add a part-time engineering intern to kind of help them with some of their administrative work. To address their increased workload on their capital programs, they're proposing to add an assistant engineer. And then they're also, just because of the level of work has expanded over time, they're looking to expand their current engineering technician to a senior level. In addition, in our employee services department, as our agency has grown, we're now actually over 100 full-time employees. The administrative requirements grow dramatically once you get over that level of 100 employees. So they're proposing to add a employee services technician to kind of address that increased workload that's resulting from the increase in our workforce. So it basically is about a 3% change in our staffing for next year. The anticipated cost of these positions affects about $500,000 for the wastewater fund and about $159,000 for pure water. That's the one thing I forgot to mention. We are proposing to add one operator in the pure water fund. When, as Paul mentioned before, when we go to expansion in 25-26, we'll be looking to propose some additional positions at that time as well too.
Hey, Fred, I just wanted to
Yeah.
pause for a second. I mean, Jose's here. One of the big changes that we're seeing in this budget certainly is our chemicals and utilities. And if there's any questions regarding that, because the increases are so substantive, and frankly, when we went to and had a growers meeting with Water Resources Agency, this was a big focus. Jose can certainly address that if you'd like, but he doesn't have to. I'm sure he would prefer not to.
And just, one of the things we try to do with our budget as well too is really see how we are in comparable with our comparable agencies. Our position definitely has improved over time. One of the great things that I'm really proud of is our operating reserves are really comparable to our nearby entities. We have about 50% of our, we've met the 50% reserve level for our operations. Our funding level for pension is still lower than what I'd like it to be, but it is comparable with our medians. This is based upon the CalPERS most recent actuarial evaluation, so we're at about 77%. Ideally, for a pension fund, you'd like to be at about at least 90%. So we're a little bit below, but we're making progress on that. Our debt service is something we still have to continue to monitor. As you know, we've had to issue a lot of debt service for Pure Water Monterey. So this is something we just have to kind of keep in mind as we issue future debt service for our wastewater improvements. The economy, it's kind of settled, which is a good news for us, over the last year. Especially, you can look at the inflation, just a couple of years ago, it was almost 9%. So right now, I was going to say the Bay Area CPI is about 4%, still a little bit higher than, averages in the past, but definitely a lot better. And our supply chain issues, things have improved a lot in that area. As you know, in our area, our unemployment rate really does vary quite a bit with the farm workers in particular. But nationally, it's at about 4%. So it's actually pretty good. The interest rates, we have to still continue to watch. They are a bit higher, obviously, than they were in the past. So this is something we'll have to factor in as we look to future fund our capital projects. And we continue to have a lot of, significant goals that we address as part of our budget. So one of the biggest things, this is why we listed it as our top things, is to continue to invest in our infrastructure, at our agency, and continue to provide timely maintenance to ensure the reliability of the plan itself. And we talked a lot about this just earlier, but, continuing to help our low-income customers, with affording their bill. Mike and his staff does a great job in, maximizing their staff to really get out there and get all the grant funding that we're eligible for, and to continue to really provide a high level of transparency to the public. And one of the things we're really proud of internally is just the continued focus on training of staff and providing for leadership opportunities for their staff so they can continue to build and grow, for our agency. So our debt, just a reminder, we have a few different issues outstanding. There are some revenue bonds. These are actually maturing in 2026. We also have, I didn't put on here, but we also have a pension side fund bond that's also retiring in 25, 26. Those are about $2 million annually of debt service. So what we're envisioning is basically using that freed up monies to basically, pay for future bond service that we need for our future, capital improvements. We do have the pure water bonds that I mentioned about. We pay about $4 million on those bonds. We have a very attractive rate on those bonds. It's 1%, which we're, really proud of on that. And we do have, basically, we get fully reimbursed for these bonds, but with the Water Resources Agency, there was some improvements done a while back that we do have some bonds outstanding for them as well, too. Pensions. So pensions, obviously, is a issue we need to continue to monitor. We as staff have really tried to do several things to kind of help address this liability. Like I said before, we issued pension bonds to address the side fund liability that we had a number of years ago. We established pension trust funds to start to help pay down the liability. What we do is when we make the annual payment on the unfunded actuarial liability, we pay the whole amount up front at the beginning of the year. That way we save a half years of interest on those payments. So it results in a couple $100,000 of savings to our agency by doing that, which is a good thing. And then what we've done through our MOU agreements is the employee pays the entire amount of the employee share, for CalPERS, and also an additional portion of the employer share as well, too. So we've done several things to help as much as we can minimize the impact to the agency of pension cost. And at this point, a capital budget. So I'm going to kind of turn it over to Matt. And there's one slide on here as well, too, for Frank to talk about the capital budgets for both our wastewater plant and for IT.
Thanks for that introduction, Fred. First of all, I'd like to say that I previewed many of the additions to the capital improvement program at the full board meeting on March 25th. Some of those major additions included projects that were identified in the recently approved renewable energy study, projects such as the digester gas handling and heating improvements, solids dewatering improvements, nutrient harvesting, and preparing for a future for advanced treatment of biosolids. There are actually about 29 major projects in the capital improvement program for the next 5 years. If we were to show you the whole spreadsheet, you'd see that many of these projects take multiple years to implement. Typically you might do design in 1 year and it might take a year or two to construct the improvements. So you see what we've done in the capital program is to be realistic about how long it takes to deliver these projects and pace them out over time. And if you saw the 10-year capital improvement program, you'd see that we've paced these projects to do our best to really minimize upfront infrastructure so it doesn't minimize upfront expenditures so it doesn't have a drastic impact on rates or the need for financing. Of those 29 major projects in the next 5 years, fully about half of them, or 15, are at the regional treatment plant, which I think makes sense because this is one of the oldest pieces of infrastructure in our system, you'll see that there are actually very few projects for the new infrastructure like Pure Water Monterey, because frankly, it's brand new equipment, doesn't require a lot of attention. Another about 9 projects are related to the various pump stations that we own and operate. Likewise, those facilities are aging, like the regional treatment plant, and they need some attention. And typically with those pump stations, that's things like upgrades of the mechanical and electrical systems. What we're also intending to do with the pump station upgrades is, to the extent that a particular pump station might be vulnerable to impacts from climate change in the future. For example, the impacts of sea level rise. If sea level rises significantly, which it is obviously projected to do with climate change impacts, that could, for example, scour out a lot of the land or the soil around these lift stations. So every time we approach one of these lift station projects, we intend to look at what may be needed to reinforce the lift station, or perhaps even look at relocation or retreat of some of this infrastructure further away from the shoreline or potentially flooded areas. One aspect of the capital improvement program, many of the projects are intended to address the impacts of climate change, especially the most immediate one, which for us is due to extreme heat. The projections are that we're going to have even more power outages as there's more and more demand on the electrical power grid. There's a need for us to become even more resilient. And so there are numerous projects listed. I can detail those for you if you'd like, but many of those same projects were also identified in the renewable energy study. So you'll see several energy related projects proposed for the coming 5 years. And then the remaining few are pipeline related projects, for example, with the outfall pipe, the outfall leading out of the regional treatment plant. There's a structure close to the beach that requires some attention to sort of shore that up. But in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through each and every capital project. I would say that there is a strong case to be made for each and every project. If needed, I can elaborate on the need for it and the risk to our agency if we were to either defer or cancel that project. But what I wanted to emphasize is that we did pace it out over time to be realistic about our ability to deliver it and to finance it. And something we did, I think that's maybe different this year, is if we know a project is not likely to be constructed until a future year, say 5 years out, we know that if we're going to go and finance that, we need to know how much it's going to cost in 5 years. So something we did with this capital program is we escalated the cost of each and every project to the anticipated midpoint of construction. And so the idea is to make sure we're setting aside enough funding or financing to actually deliver those projects. I think that's it for the capital program, unless you have any questions about particular projects.
And what I'm going to do for the board basically is just kind of focus very quickly on the numbers part kind of related to the capital program. So we do have a number of capital projects we've started this year that we're carrying forward to next year. It's about $11 million of those projects. The biggest 3 of those relate to switchgear replacements, the CO digestion capacity, and the forward interceptor, some repairs we're doing on that project. I kind of put this in the middle, probably should have put this a little later, but I'm going to now talk about what we have proposed in addition for 24-25. So I'm going to kind of turn it over to Frank and let Frank talk a little bit about the IT projects we're proposed for next year.
All right. Thanks, Fred. So a lot of these projects that we have proposed for next year, they've been on the books for a couple years. We just have to have the staff to get to them. And we've also updated the cost if those have increased over time. The one thing I would like to point out is of that, 1.3 million, approximately probably about 525,000 of it is all cybersecurity related. highlight the item that is cybersecurity. That's related to our match for the EPA grant that we have received for the next 2 years. So we are definitely making a strong focus on that. And I'm open for any questions you have on any specific items that are listed here.
And then just kind of continuing on. So on our wastewater improvements, again, we're really continuing to invest in that area. It's another $12 million of new projects for next year. The board already knows about the first one because they've approved the kind of the multi-year project for that, but basically it's for the pump stations at both Monterey and Seaside. A couple of the other main projects for new main projects for next year include the final effluent meter, some pipe repairs at Fort Ord, the fire pump station storage tanks, which we've talked about for a little while, and upgrading pump station 15 as well. Sorry. So basically, I kind of talked about this earlier, but it's a pretty aggressive program for next year. $30 million for a wastewater fund. The two that I talked about earlier, the new capital improvement projects, we're continuing to focus, like I mentioned before, on capital maintenance, spending about another $1 million on that. IT, we mentioned about $1.5 million. And in the departmental capital outlay, between all their various projects, it's another $4 million. So we're really using our rate increase as it's desired to reinvest in our agency. And I think that's a really important point.
And I just want to, can you go back a slide, please? I just wanted to point out, if you go back, like Tom and Ron, who've probably been here the longest on this board, you probably remember not that long ago, we were doing $3 and $4 million a year total, capital as well as all the expenditures. So this has represented a significant increase, and hence the reason some of these budget concerns and debt service that we're looking at is there's a lot more going on in terms of investment. So, I mean, you probably remember when it was less than 4 million, in all honesty. So.
And yeah, actually, this is a perfect slide to go to. So really, this kind of ties into what Paul's saying. There's really a huge need for us, going forward the next several years for continued reinvestment, in our wastewater treatment facility and related infrastructure. You can see the total plan over 10 years is about $330 million. That's a lot of money. And so obviously we're going to need to work with the board to kind of address future rate increases to help pay for, these necessary improvements. So one of the things at our budget BPC meeting earlier this month was we did an initial long-term forecast for the committee, and the committee asked us to come back with a couple of different scenarios as to basically how to pay for the improvements I just talked about, going forward in the future. So basically we've done two main different scenarios, and there's a couple of different alternatives we'll also talk about afterwards. So the first scenario, this basically assumes, now again, the board has also talked to us, and we'll look at this as well too, potentially changing our rate structure in particular for, single family versus multifamily homes. But this is just assuming for, at least for right now, that there's no changes in that structure. So under scenario one, in order to kind of fund our needed improvements going forward in the future, we're looking that rates would probably need to increase about 15% a year, starting in fiscal year 26-27 to 28-29. So that would result in the rates going from basically starting in 25-26. That's the last current year of our 5-year rate study, of $54 to about $82 by the time we get to 28-29. If we do that, it will help to finance a lot of our bond financing. There's about $70 million, a little bit over $70 million that we'll need for bond financing for those improvements I just talked about earlier. With this type of rate increase, we can maintain our operating reserve at 50% of our annual budget. Our capital reserve will increase to 16% of our 10-year capital improvement plan. And that's really important because the goal is to be at 20% by the time we're at 30-31. And that's only 2 years away from 28-29. So we don't want to have to, have a dramatic rate increase those last 2 years in order to hit that level of capital reserve. And our bond coverage level will be actually pretty good as well too. It's about 262% with this scenario. And what we're assuming in this scenario basically is that the interest cost in the bonds would be about 5% annually. And the debt service that we issue every year, we would start paying for in the next year after we issue the debt service.
Now let's pause here for a second.
Yeah.
So at Budget Personnel Committee, I think the request was made of, are there some options? Can we look at stretching out the capital plan? Can we issue bonds at different points? Can we use different financing? I didn't mean to make the screen go dark. But, oh, good. So this is that first look of what was requested is what does it really mean? And what it really means, as Fred just pointed out, I want to focus in on it, is the $54 and 25.26. That's part of the existing Prop 218. It's thereafter, there's going to need to be some relatively significant rate increases of 15% for future boards to act on under this scenario. As you look at the next ones, there's a little less, but it's not as dramatic as one would think. At the end, he'll talk about some other levers the board has, but once again, it is not as significant as we would think. I know 4.5 years ago when we talked to you, we thought 6% would be reasonable moving into the future. Our forecasts were somewhat wrong, specific with chemicals, utility costs, PERS costs, and frankly, interest rates. So when you factor all those things in for the next foreseeable future, as Fred has done here over the next 3 years, it's a different scenario than we were looking at 4.5 years ago. So I just wanted to highlight that, like looking at that 15% before he goes on to the next few scenarios. Thanks, Fred.
Yeah, no problem. So what we basically, and this is where I kind of talked a lot with Matt on this, because I kind of wanted to see of the capital projects, and, the board wanted to know, and Matt talked a lot about this as well, too. We really felt we couldn't defer. There was a little bit of changing that we did with the capital projects, what we initially presented to BPC, but not really a lot, because there's just a lot of needed improvements at the plant. And, the longer you delay them, the more likely, bad things can happen. And we don't want that to occur. We want to ensure reliability of the plant. We want to make sure, we have good operating equipment over there. So we did adjust it a little bit, the capital plan, but we just felt we couldn't adjust it too much. So this second scenario, what we basically did was the key difference on this is a couple key things. Number one, we assumed we could take advantage of WIFIA or SRF financing, which tends to be a little bit less costly than in the private market, in essence. WIFIA, it's a little bit more challenged with SRF. It's a little bit more challenging with SRF. You typically need to have about a 3-year time frame to get approval from them, and they're a little bit more strict on what they're going to accept. And unfortunately, right now, like for example, with the state, their fiscal issues that they're facing right now, it can be subject to cuts. The WIFIA program is a lot more promising in the way they structure their program in a couple different ways. Their rates tend to be a little bit lower. And the other thing too is they treat it more like basically a drawdown approach. Most private bonds, you have to issue the entire amount of the bonds up front, but with WIFIA, you can just draw it down as you need, and that saves us money, going forward. So there is more administrative work to do a WIFIA loan, but definitely there's a lot of benefit to us as an agency in being able to take advantage of those loans. The other thing we looked at as well too on the debt service is instead of starting to pay it off like right after it's issued, is to look to delay it a little bit, to delay it to 3 years after they're issued, to kind of, again, smooth out the debt service a little bit. But it's interesting, even with this approach, the rate increases, although they're a little bit lower than our first scenario, they're not a lot. We could do a rate increase of about 13%. And the ending rate at 28.29 would be a little bit lower than our first scenario, about $78 a month, but not a lot. We still, though, would be able to meet our operating reserve goals, our capital reserve goals, and our bond coverage level goals as well, too. So this is kind of the other main scenario we wanted to just present to the board. There are a couple other things that the board could consider as well, too. So when we did our budgets in past years, one of the things we had talked about with the board was when that debt service was expiring in 25-26, of using that to starting to pay down the PERS liability, basically. But as you can see, there's a huge need for us to basically invest in our capital projects. So I don't think that's necessarily potentially an option, but we could look at a potentially a little bit different option. So PERS offers basically different amortization schedules for paying off your debt. Currently, we're on a 20-year amortization schedule. They do offer the ability to go to either a 15 or a 10-year amortization schedule. When you go to a shorter schedule, obviously you're going to pay more, in particularly more in the early years, but over time, you're going to save a lot of money. As you can see in this scenario, we would save about almost $4 million of interest if we went from a 20-year amortization schedule to a 10 or 15-year amortization schedule. This will vary over time. As you know, PERS, their projections change every year. But the key thing is the more you're paying up front, the more you're going to save, in monies. You could potentially do it to a 10-year. And obviously you get a lot more savings by paying it off earlier, but the increase in payment is pretty substantial. It's about another $1 million over the 15-year option. So, but we do think that potentially that 15-year option would be a viable source. We don't think we'd have to raise rates. So it's something for the board to consider. The other thing that the board asked us to kind of take a look at as well too is could we start the rate study early, basically, and for the 25-26 year, which Paul talked about earlier, of that rate only going up 6%, could we increase it basically? So we did look at that scenario where we would basically increase the rate a similar percentage as we're doing for this year by another 16% in essence. So in that scenario, the rate would go from basically instead of $54, it would be $59 in 25-26. By doing that rate increase earlier, your future rate increases percentage-wise are less. They're about only 9.5% a year. So the final ending rate by 28-29 would be about the same as it was in scenario 2 of about $78. You'd still have sufficient debt coverage ratios, and you'd still meet both your operating reserve and your capital reserve levels. So these are another couple options for the board to think about. The other thing I just kind of want to remind the board, we really pride ourselves in financial transparency. So we work with community relations to develop, I think, a really great 2-page budget and brief. That's on our website. We also have an interactive section on our website where people can go and kind of see both the revenues and expenses of our budget. And with that, that concludes our presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions of the boards.
Thank you, directors. Questions? Director Rocha.
The option that was presented to increase the amortization period to 15 years, where the amount remains at 3.45 million for all 15 years. My question regarding that option is, number one, for clarification, that does not raise rates, correct?
We don't anticipate having to raise rates, no, because the amount of the increase, it's bigger upfront where we still have a little bit of flexibility, and it's smaller in the future years. So we anticipate not having to increase rates. Yes.
And what would that increase to what we're paying? How would that impact our CIP projects?
We don't anticipate really because the amount of the increase would be about 800,000 in the first year, 600, 400, 200. Then we actually start saving monies in those future years. But we figure overall, because it's more a long-term basically projection, we figure we could kind of keep our CIP plan as is. So
and that's the CIP plan that you mentioned that was more aggressive, correct?
yeah, the more aggressive one. That's exactly right.
Yeah, I would just on a preliminary analysis of it, go forward with that option. The reason I say that is because coming from a jurisdiction with a very high pension obligation and also a significantly large need for capital investment, we have $1 billion worth of projects that we need to do in the city, and obviously we don't have $1 billion. And so I think that it allows for you to invest in your capital improvements project and also pay down your pension debt, which I think would be a smart move for the organization. Yeah.
Director.
Couple questions.
Next up,
real quick. Where did 42 pump stations come from? Seriously, there was 26 when I was here.
Oh, I mean, that's the number I had. I mean,
Okay,
yeah.
Does that
So it was a
include
10 we own.
Sorry?
It's a 10 that we actually own. And I guess there is a couple small ones now. And then I always thought it was 36. I thought there was 26 other entity pump stations we take care of. So
26 total. Anyway, the other question I have for the engineering group, very aggressive plan. I love it. And I know we have to invest in the thing. And I think I've already asked this question, but does the engineering department
thank you.
have the bandwidth to do this level of projects at this pace?
Short answer is yes.
Okay.
we know that we have to ramp up, we have to increase efficiencies. And so we have ideas to do that, such as bundling many smaller projects into larger projects. But one part of the budget proposal is to add to our capacity. And
Okay.
so you see those positions of adding an assistant engineer. This is like a up and coming junior engineer. We could teach project management and project delivery. And then of course, the intern position.
And you had an engineer, you had the one intern and the assistant engineer, and then the
That's right. And we've had one of our existing engineering techs and construction inspectors stepping up into a senior role.
That's great, 'cause-
So we are building depth on our bench to be able to better deliver capital projects.
That's good. Great. Thank you. And then I will agree with Director Rocha that I kind of like that I think it was the third scenario where it kind of spreads it out a little smaller rate increases, but sooner. I think it was. If we can go back to that slide.
526.
Yeah.
oh, so like on that one, it was actually doing a rate increase. Doing a rate study. So it would sooner, so it would be implemented in 25, 26 versus staying with the existing Prop 218.
Correct.
Okay.
That's the way I understood it.
So it might mean something a little higher in 25, 26 than under the current Prop 218.
Right. So
sequence.
current Prop 218 is for 6%
Right.
in 25, 26. I think what this is projecting, without knowing all the answers, is somewhere similar to what we are doing this year with that 15.8. But then you're right. In future years, it goes down to 9.5 versus a straight 13%. So,
And I believe it gives us the money we need to achieve our goals.
yes.
The only caution I'll have a little bit on that is one of the capital projects we have is for Matt to kind of do a comprehensive review of basically all of our capital projects, which may change dramatically the projects that we have funded going forward in the future. Definitely doesn't mean we couldn't look at that, but it could, especially if like last time we did a 5-year rate study, if we're going to have that study done in, let's say, a year or two, we may want to just consider that.
Can I clarify this a little bit? Many of the projects that are proposed are to prepare the regional treatment plant for the future. You know this well, there's a liquid side to the plant and there's a solids handling side to the plant. Whatever type of liquid treatment we have in the future, we're likely going to have to continue to operate and maintain that solids handling side. So a lot of the projects are going to reinvest and extend the useful life of the solids handling side. The master plan line item that Fred is referring to, it's one fairly modest line item in the amount of about $500,000 is for a master plan for a comprehensive upgrade of the liquid side of the regional treatment plant. You know this well, the existing regional treatment plant was commissioned in 1990. It's going on 35 years old. And by the time we're able to fund and finance a comprehensive upgrade to this thing, it'll be more than 40 years old. And so we really need to start planning ahead. What is that plant going to look like? And how much is it going to cost? We need to get a planning level cost estimate. But at this point, the first probably 7 years is really going to be pouring into the solids handling side so that we can then turn our attention towards the liquid side of the regional treatment plant in the longer term.
Director Rocha.
Just for clarification, there was a mention to the rate study. Where is that referenced in the the consideration of early pay down for CalPERS? Because what I was referencing was the reduce of the amortization period to 15 years, which I thought would be payments increasing for the first 4 years, then payments decreasing for the next 5 years. And it states no rate increases would be required to implement this solution. So what portion of that was the rate study? Can you remind me?
Yeah, certainly. The rate study is actually B. So below that one, you're absolutely right. If we could stay with the current Prop 218 increase of 15.8 this year, 6% next year, and still do the PERS option there, that 15-year amortization. The rate study is sort of a separate issue to try to jumpstart the revenue coming in. That's why we tried to structure it in scenario A and B is with our existing Prop 218, we can do debt financing to cover the costs. We recommend also that we do the 15-year amortization, basically shifting the payment from some of those other debts to this, and thereby saving $3.7 million over the time frame. The rate study is sort of a different cafeteria item, if you will.
And Director Cronin was mentioning that the way I understand, if we go through the other process with the rate study, it would be potentially higher the first couple of years, but would level off the subsequent years. Or can you clarify what you were mentioning with that?
So what I understood and I don't have it up anymore, is that if we did the rate study, we would do a new 218.
Yeah.
And readjust the rate starting in 25, 26.
Yes.
Which is still within the current 218. So we would issue a 218 on top of a 218?
It would
or
take the point.
supplant it.
Yes.
And then it would be a fairly, I think a 13, did I see a 13%?
16%.
16% first year and then 9.5 going out. So 16% whack once and then 10 going on.
Versus what we had as scenario B was 13% after the existing.
Correct.
218.
Understood. Okay.
But we can still do the option A, the PERS thing.
I would want to do that, but also I agree with that option as well. If we could merge both of them. I mean, I understand they're two separate things, but
yeah.
do them simultaneously.
And just a clarification, that 16% is an estimate of what might come out of the next 218 process. Could be something different.
It could be something different, but ballpark, we feel that would work. That'd be what would work.
Right.
Now, I think what Fred cautioned us on is we had also talked about changing our rate structure. So the specific percentages for any individual may not be reflective of that 16% and 9.5s in the future, but overall, that would be a ballpark.
Plus, as we've learned at Marina Coast with our current Prop 218 and rate study, Prop 218 continues to be interpreted by the courts in a variety of ways, and there are new best practices which the cost estimating engineers who do these rate studies for you are bringing in to the mix that may have sometimes maybe some surprising results rate wise, but okay. Vice Chair Williamson.
Great presentation. Thank you for the report. What is the industry standard for rate increases? So I know that we looking at 15, 13%. Is there a standard that we look to kind of help guide us of where we're trying to establish ourselves at?
I might answer that just in a little bit different way. And we did this last time when we did the 5-year rate study. One of the things we try to do is look at where we're at with our comparable agencies, basically to see, are we at the bottom, in the middle, at the top, basically. So when we did the first, our current 5-year rate study that's in place, we were more towards the bottom. So this is something for the board just to be aware about. And we'll have this in the final budget document as well too. We're actually more towards the middle right now. So when if we're going to be doing 15% rate increases, it's not like we're just going from the bottom to the middle. I mean, we're going to be going up, but I mean, we're not alone in facing all of our infrastructure. I mean, there's a lot of our, member agencies, I shouldn't say, but our comparable agencies are facing similar issues. The Bay Area is a really good example, and I forget the exact term for it. Paul probably knows a lot better than I do, but basically they're trying to affect the nutrients discharges into the bay. Yeah. That is adding up substantial amount of costs for all of those, agencies in the Bay Area that they're having to address in their future rate increases. So we're basically in a similar boat compared to others. Paul, I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit.
So ballpark is what you're saying is what does industry do? It depends on the timing. So I'm going to go back 20 years ago, long time ago. For agencies, 3 to 5% was pretty normal. I mean, that's just what agencies like this did. I think what we saw is a lot of wastewater agencies got behind, just like we did. And when we did our Prop 218, it was the largest one I'd ever been involved with, but it was necessary. We're starting to see that throughout the industry, and it's a little shocking. Some are higher than what we've done. So it has been all over the board. But from a projection standpoint, what I've always used just to, just sort of that, is it the right size? Is looking at our budget, about 2/3 of it is operations and maintenance and salaries and benefits. So maybe CPI is a good indicator for that. The other third of it is construction. It's building stuff. Well, I look at the ENR index on what that percent increase is, and then you blend those, and that could give you a ballpark feel. Now, it's different for any individual agency because when we're trying to do $30 million, that's a significant chunk. But, so ballpark, that's what I would tend to use. And I think generally speaking, ENR, and certainly in the last 4 years, ENR has to be at 8% or more. So I don't know if that helps at all.
It
but
does. It does. In my mind, and I'll speak to this more in a second, but I want us to be as aggressive as possible, but within reason.
Yeah.
But hearing this also makes me feel better about what's being proposed and not going too crazy with it. I truly get the balance of it, but I'm also trying to set up a framework where we're not continuing to kick the can down the road, and we really try to handle some of this, at least move in the right direction and handling some of these things. And I see us getting there, right? With the reserves. I think we're getting on top of our CIP projects. There's the pension liability. I think there's a couple of things here that we're getting through. So it does help.
And let me just clarify, ENR is Engineering News Record. I started using acronyms and didn't explain them, just like I always berate Jose and Fred not to do. So Engineering News Record is just one of those standards in the industry that tracks construction costs.
And if I may add, it is true that many plants like ours across all of the United States were originally funded by federal grant funds. Big time money was flowing in the 70s and 80s coming out of the Clean Water Act. And so I think it led a lot of agencies to really not do a good job setting aside repair and replacement funds. And so I do need to emphasize, if you pay attention to what's going on in industry, there are plants all over California that are reaching the end of their useful life, much like our regional treatment plant is. And so I think you'll see, if we do this rate study and we do these comparisons to neighboring agencies, even with these significant proposed increases to cover these capital costs, we will likely continue to stay in the middle of the road. And what I want to emphasize is that many of the Bay Area agencies, because they discharge into San Francisco Bay, are being driven to essentially by regulatory agencies to upgrade their plants to remove nutrients. This capital plan is intended to stay a little bit ahead of the regulators. I would advise us, let's not risk deferring projects so long that we get in trouble with the regulators and are forced to do it at a very accelerated schedule. At this point, I think because we're staying a little bit ahead of the regulations, addressing things like PFAS, et cetera, we have not only an opportunity to pace the expenditures, but because we're on the leading edge and we're doing the kinds of things that regulatory agencies want us to do, we're much more likely to be eligible for significant grant funds. So I think what we're presenting is really a kind of a worst case scenario. I think if we move on some of these projects, there's a really good potential to offset a significant amount of these capital costs with grants.
It's a really interesting tidbit that you provided us, just from a historical perspective and being better able to understand that. So I appreciate you sharing that additional insight. In a different question, is there a in the scenario 2, you brought up the WIFIA opportunity. Could that not be included as part of the scenario 1 as also?
We could. I mean, we just wanted to show. I guess the main thing was this: we could. Well, let me backtrack a second.
Isn't that the primary difference between 1 and 2?
There's 2 differences.
The
One is
year of
WIFIA. The other thing is the
The rates.
deferral, basically, of the payment of the debt service.
Yeah.
So the WIFIA normally would take us about a year to kind of get that financing in place. So we could definitely do kind of an option 1 where in essence, first year we did private financing, thereafter we did basically WIFIA and SRF, but that we pay the debt service the year after. So we can absolutely do kind of like melding of the two together. So.
Okay. I mean, that's kind of where my head went with it. And so I think that would be probably the best model because you're looking at that kind of more regressive rate structure, but also including that WIFIA, which provides the lower rate and that ability. Forgot how you communicated it, but right, we're not asking for it all
To
up
draw
front.
down, yeah, draw down.
Draw down. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So you do a $10 million project, you start drawing that much. You
Not
don't pay
getting
for the
that
whole.
burden of the debt. Yep, absolutely. Okay, and then just a couple final thoughts here. It would be helpful to see some scenarios, like maybe when this comes back in the future, as it relates to the CIP and how that's affected with some scenarios, like how, and it may not be affected at all. Maybe that's why it wasn't included, but it would be helpful to kind of see how would those different rate scenarios impact our CIP.
Right.
Oh, so are you wanting to look at like other rate scenarios just besides the one we presented?
No, how these ones did.
That's correct. I mean, I think it
So-
would be helpful to have more than two, but whenever we come back around to talking about rate increases, when we do the Prop 218, I think it'd be helpful to see, hey, if we do this kind of easier one, how does that affect our CIP versus something that might be more in the middle and a more aggressive one?
Oh, yeah,
We
for
will-
different rate amounts. Okay.
We'll absolutely do that for the comprehensive rate and fee study. There's going to be a number of elements to it, certainly looking at what our 10 and 20-year plans are, how aggressive we can be or should be, as well as replacement value of what we have out there to establish a reasonable, equitable capacity fee. But in reference to what you have before you, we were sort of looking for some inclination to scenario 1 or 2, which is predicated on the capital plan that was out there, because we hope in a week and a half, June 3rd, to come back to the board to approve this budget with whatever you all decide. The PERS thing, whether we want to go move forward with a comprehensive rate study, as well as the financing options.
Okay. No, I have a lot. I'm gonna say something. I agree with the amortization plan of 15 years. I mean, the 10 years looks even better because we're saving more, but I know that that's a harder pill to swallow in regards to all the things that we're balancing. So I appreciate staff's kind of focus on the 15 year as a good middle ground. And then I also agree with the adjusting rates earlier so that if we can get it sooner, I think that's always better, right? Because it goes against that idea of kicking the can down the road. So I think doing that, but I would also offer, and maybe this could be packaged in a scenario of maybe not going all the way down to 9.5% in those out years, but how can we be a little bit more aggressive? Maybe not the full 15%, but could we fall somewhere else there that allows us to get some of these buckets taken care of a little bit quicker, sooner, and maybe help reduce the debt that the agency owes in the long term. And then the last thought I have is, but I think one of the additional benefits of jumping into the Prop 218 earlier with starting with 25, 26 is that might help us prevent any kind of future economic unknowns that might exist. So I think locking those in earlier before there might be shock by a downturn, if that happens, I think just is another benefit for us to kind of maybe get on top of that earlier. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Other directors, Director Church.
Just want to point out that over 4 or 5 years here, this is all adds up, of course, to a significant amount. It's 40% or something like that. And that's, most people aren't going to have a 40% income raise or Social Security raise or whatever it is. And with the way our district is set up, there's no way a 218 is ever going to get overturned. There's just too many people. It's too diverse. It's too spread out. And if whatever we decide on here to go with, I think it's important that we find a way to explain it to people, to let the public know what is going on. And it's not like we're just, we're just going to raise the rates because we're going to raise the rates. And I just think that has to be addressed in the best way as possible. I know we're looking at maybe finding new ways to charge. I know we're looking at ways to help those who really need it, but it's more than capital improvement here. It's people, and we're trying to serve them and trying to be as least painful as possible.
Other directors, Director Habino.
I'm referring to this slide that was other funds. And in a world, everything going up so dramatically in terms of all the costs, CSIP and renewable energy are down between the two of them $1 million. And then the pure water is up 1.4, but then we wouldn't be up and running with expansion. So is it going to cost that much more if we're running at the same pace in terms of utilities and chemicals?
Yeah. I mean, our utilities and chemicals have gone up on average, I think between 10 to 20% over the last couple of years. So we've had substantial increases, in those areas. This just reflects some of our other needs in pure water as well too. One of the things we're trying to address in there as well too is incorporating a little, like in our wastewater budget, basically we incorporate a contingency. We'd never really had that before in wastewater. So to kind of give us a little bit more flexibility, we haven't built it up to the same level as we have in our wastewater fund, but we're starting to, I think it's a 2% contingency that we started with in the pure water fund to just give us flexibility for unknown cost. But it's primarily, chemicals, some maintenance as well too, but chemicals and utilities that are really driving a lot of the cost.
And Kent, to your point of this does not reflect when an expansion comes online, but one could expect a similar increase because the chemicals are still needed and the power is still needed. However, we are getting that direct line from Regen to us to power the advanced water purification facility. So in theory, our power usage is going to go up a percentage, but our cents per kilowatt hour will go down. So there could be some savings there in future years. We need to see how that balances. At this point, they're not going to be connected until the end of 25. So pretty much when expansion comes online. But the chemicals, I mean, we're not really using more chemicals. It's just they're a heck of a lot more expensive, right?
And then you were talking also about CSIP and renewable energy. So CSIP, they unfortunately their funding sources, they've actually asked us to basically kind of cut back our expenditure. So we kind of work together with them to basically reduce our budgets, for next year. We've had to kind of defer some of our capital projects as a result that are kind of needed out there in that area. But they weren't able to raise their revenues as to levels they had hoped. So basically they asked us to kind of work with them to cut our budget. So we did that in that area. So that's in the CSIP budget. Renewable energy, if I remember right, and Paul or Matt, you may know more about this, but I think there's some studies that we had our consultant working on, and the big part of that was this fiscal year. And the budget for this next fiscal year assumes the hiring of a renewable manager position, which had kind of been vacant for a while. And we had kind of had this consultant doing some of that work. So.
And I want to emphasize the projects related to renewable energy. A lot of those are likely to be eligible for grant funding. You've heard about our agency's big $50 million grant application for the project to upgrade our biogas to renewable natural gas and sell it to PG&E. And then we have another California Energy Commission grant for a project to interconnect the electrical systems of the 3 plants out there. So that's why you see a flat or like a decrease in the year, because a lot of the capital projects are likely to be purely grant funded.
Thanks.
All right. Any other questions?
I just have a quick
Vice Chair Williamson.
add on to Board Member Church's comment in regards to explaining it. And I think it definitely does deserve a deeper conversation, because it's no matter what we do, it's going to be putting us in a tough situation. I mean, the increasing rates at all for some people is just a challenge. And I think I appreciate you raising that, because we have to be careful not to just talk about spending, but we have to explain the story. And I think that there is a story here. I mean, we're hearing about the increased cost burden, whether it's the chemicals, supplies, pension liability, utilities, the debt. So there's a burden to the agency with the fact of the matter of us just doing business. I also think it provides greater certainty for the future. If we can get on top of some of these things, we can create some stability for the agency. You did bring up the low income assistance program, which is a really good thing for us to be able to communicate as part of that message, because people may not be aware of it. So that could be just a thing that we want to be certain that we're always putting out there. And I think the biggest thing for me in my mind is, what is the risk of allowing these systems to fail? I think that's the greater fear and unknown, by not getting a hold of this stuff and allowing it to keep slipping away from us. That could put us in a lot tougher position and impact people's lives.
Thank you, Vice Chair Williamson. And I do have a question on page 8 of the presentation. It's not really so much a question because I happen to know the answer to it, but not everyone necessarily in the room or in the public does. You'll note down at the bottom that Marina Coast Water District pays a little bit less per acre foot of produced water. But if you'd confirm for me, the main price difference is Pure Water Monterey has to bear the cost of injection into the Seaside Basin. And of course, Marina Coast is delivering straight to Bayonet and Black Horse. So there's no injection currently going on.
That's exactly, there's a couple other components too that are excluded, but that's the main component. Yes.
And then, of course, if we're looking for new revenue sources, if our lien fees and fines start going down as a consequence of going to the county tax agency, maybe we can look to some new non-ratepayer revenues. How about naming rights for some of our pump stations? They do that for pro stadiums. Would Seaside like to pay $100,000 to have the Seaside pump station named? Seaside pump station? And just an idea. All right.
People who just want to spend money. I mean, they have so much money, they don't know what to do with it sometimes.
There are some folks like that around
Our
here.
existence.
I have a hunch that there might be some people like to put some politicians' names to those pump stations.
Hey, use my name. Go ahead.
Instead of
to the urinal.
teens infrastructure down the street, let's buy a house across the street, put the infrastructure downstairs, do an Airbnb upstairs, to get a little income out of the deal.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Let's see. So the board has some ideas for you. Take us seriously, staff. All right.
Wastewater.
If there are no other questions or comments from directors, we'll go out to the public. If the public has questions or comments on this study session about our budget. I don't see anyone in the room jumping up, and I do not see, Chai, do you see any hands going up outside? Okay. Staff, do you have enough direction?
Is it okay if I recap the direction just to make sure?
Absolutely.
So, in terms of scenario 1, 2, sort of the blend of that, making sure we try to get access to WIFIA or lower interest, but possibly deferring debt payments so as to reduce the impacts, maintain the capital projects as identified, go for the 15-year amortization on the PERS, and then initiate a rate study, a comprehensive rate and fee study. As it's going to be as soon as we can, because it would have to be go out for Prop 218 notifications next March, April. So that would be something we would do. But this budget that would be before you on June 3rd obviously would not reflect that, other than the costs for a consultant. But the other items would be in there. Is that a decent recap? And did I miss anything? Okay.
Vice Chair Williamson.
Just a little bit of a side note, because the conversation of the rate study coming up sooner than I think we maybe anticipated. One of the things that we talked about then, just as a reminder, was looking at different ways of charging the fee.
Yes,
So I just
absolutely.
wanted to make sure that we kept that at the top of mind too, as we look at that, because that could also help lower income families as well.
And if I may expand on that. So if that's the general board direction, that's what we will go forth with, finalize a budget and bring it forward. In terms of that comprehensive rate and fee study, the structure difference that we're talking about is right now a single family home pays the same, whether it's a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, or a 10-bedroom, 7-bath. we want to look at, is there a different way to approach that, whether it be fixture count or, I mean, there's a number of ways that are out there, as we all know, fixture count, flows, square footage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But whatever consultant we have will drive them that direction.
Thank you.
All right, very good. Thank you very much, staff. Appreciate your inputs on the budget. Important, if painful thing, having to deal with a budget.
Budget.
All right, we'll go to agenda item 8, staff reports.
After that lengthy discussion, I'll have none. Anyone else? Okay, good.
Mike did a thumbs down on that one.
Yeah. All right, we go to agenda item 9, board member comments. Any on my right? Any on my left? I do have one, which does pertain a little bit to recycled water. So for the last 70 years, Marine Coast Water District, and prior to that, the United States Army has been operating off a pump station and a concrete tank that sits today adjacent to Sea Haven. 70-year-old infrastructure, 70-year-old pumps. So about a year ago,
70 or 7?
70,
Okay.
right? Finding replacement parts for pumps that are no longer manufactured, those manufacturers out of business, et cetera. So about a year ago, we completed 2 new tanks, which you can see very nicely painted up on an easement we got from CSUMB after 15 years of wrangling with CSUMB, and a new pump station. And all of the water that the tanks serve Zone A, which is our lowest elevation zone. We have zones up, I believe, to F as it climbs into the Ord community. And all of the water from our groundwater pumps pass through this pump station, or will be passing through this new pump station, which we would have liked to have turned on a year ago to turn off 70-year-old pumps and so forth. And unfortunately, how shall we say, PG&E and CSUMB had a disagreement over a 20-foot easement, which the good news is they have now just last week resolved and signed off. So we will now be able to push the electrical wiring through to actually turn on this pump station, start filling those tanks a year after we wanted to do so, and after having them sit there providing no benefit, but at substantial cost for a year. The good news is we will now be able to convert the old concrete tank for recycled water use. So we will have some additional storage for advanced treated recycled water going forward. That'll take a little while, but anyway, that's my board member comment. We go to public comment on closed session items. Anyone wishing to address the board on matters appearing on closed session may do so at this time. Please limit your comment to 3 minutes. Anyone from the public on Zoom? Seeing none, I don't see anyone jumping up in the room. So we will go to closed session for a conference with labor negotiators under Government Code Section 54957.6.